Hello, Gareth. Thanks very much for joining me on the show.
Hello, Carl. It's great to finally catch up with you. It's been a long time since you and I had a chance to chat, and I really welcome this opportunity to be in your show and to engage with you.
Yeah, no, it's been a long time, hasn't it? We go back many, many moons. I'm not sure when the first time we met, but it's probably at the very early parts of the 2000s, isn't it? In the very early days of me doing this kind of stuff. And I know you've been doing some amazing stuff with your coaching, particularly around aim point, which we'll get to. But for those folks listening, Gareth, who perhaps don't know, you just fill in a little bit of a potty history of what brought you to this point in your career.
Sure. So I was a young golfer, had aspirations to be a tour golfer, like a lot of young golfers do and did back then. And when I realized that I wasn't going to be the next greatest competitor to the European Tour, Colin Montgomery, who would have been around the top of the tour at that point in time, I turned my eye to coaching. I went through the PGA certification, which I qualified out of, I think, in 1997. Around that time as well, Carl, I stumbled upon a book by a guy called Dan Millman called Body Mind Mastery, which captured me in a way that no other book had previous because we were going through the whole kind of fallow area of perfect movement, and you could create this golf swing that never breaks down under pressure. And I would practice like a lunatic, and then I'd go out in a tournament, and it's like I'd never nearly played golf before, and I couldn't access those skills that I thought I had grooved. So I lapped up Dan Millman's book, and then you probably remember a guy called Alan Fine. He
I
wrote a
do.
book as well around the same time, yeah.
Yeah.
And then, of course, I stumbled upon Timothy Galloway, and that sparked in me a journey of curiosity about the mind and performance, the brain and performance, how humans create performances, and how we can assist them in maybe creating more of the performances they desire. So I've been studying that ever since, and I've really enjoyed the journey, I have to say. It's a fascinating subject, and it's one that you never tire of, and there's always a little gem coming at you from somewhere, whether it's one of your guests in the podcast that I listen to, or you'll just hear something that resonates at times and go, wow, that's really interesting. Fast forward about a quarter of a century, I'm based in Dublin, Ireland, and work out of a club in Edmonstown Golf Club, South Dublin, and mainly coaching all the time between performance coaching and aim point. I've got plenty going on.
Yeah, yeah. And what was it looking back at that book, that Dan Millman book, Gareth? What was it that grabbed your attention with that book over anything else that you'd read at that time?
Almost everything to that point, Carl, had been highly technical. Like the industry was pivoting in a very particular direction around Ledbetter and Faldo, and it was more intricate movement patterns and more detail and layer. And Millman just opened my eyes to the fact that, hold on, the mind and body have to work together.
Yeah.
And obvious as all as that is to say at this point in time, to me back then, that was quite revelatory. And I realized that no matter how good my physical game became, if my mental game and perhaps as importantly, my emotional game couldn't match it, I would never have the capacity to fulfill maybe what my potential was.
Mm, mm. So it opened this journey of exploration in that area, which I presume you bring to a lot of your coaching now, which we'll come back to. But tell me a bit more about the aim point, about how you got into that and why you found it so beneficial for golfers.
I'm going to be very honest here, and I can do this because I've told the creator and founder of Aimpoint, Mark Sweeney, this story, as I have Jimmy Donaldson out of Woburn's a senior instructor in Europe, and I've told them both this over a beer. I found Aimpoint in early 2011, and as we were all coming through a tough time financially then because of the crisis, and
Yeah.
what I noticed is people were putting coaching programs on hold because there was so much uncertainty. They're like, it's excremental outgoings right now that I just don't want to do. And I figured I need to do something here to trigger people, to get people back in front of me and give them a reason maybe to open those wallets and those purses. And so I engaged with Aimpoint, and they agreed to do some stuff in Europe. So I was the first coach in Ireland to bring them to Ireland. And here's the key, Carl. I was the most cynical person standing on that putting green. And that's blind honesty for you, okay? I'm standing on the putting green. I'm like, I could play this game to a decent level. And I grew up playing in Donegal and gale force winds and all sorts. And we figured it out more or less. And I thought, these guys, look, as long as I get people in front of them, it's doing my job for me. And about 15 minutes into the first clinic, I walked up and I tapped Jimmy on the shoulder and he said, "Are you okay, mate?" And I went, "Yeah, I want to be certified, please."
Right.
And he went, "What?" I said, "I want to be certified." And the reason for it was this: I was seeing a process in the putting green that took away guesswork.
Mm.
And I came to realize that everything I was doing on the green was based largely around guesswork. And because I had hit so many putts as a young golfer, my guesses were pretty good.
Yeah.
but they were still guesses.
Mm.
And I figured if I could give people a process which eliminated some of the guesswork, it freed up their attention to look at other areas. So in other words, speed and start line.
Mm.
And that's when I began my journey with Aimpoint. It was 2011, was my 14th year working with them. And to be part of that evolution, what it was and what it's become and continuing to become is really exciting.
Mm. And for those who don't know about Aimpoint, how does it essentially take me through the mechanics of how ultimately it does take the guesswork out of putting?
Okay, ultimately, all that's important when you're putting is what's between the ball and the hole. It doesn't matter where lakes are or rivers are or anything like that, because what the only thing that can affect the golf ball is what it is experiencing on its journey to the hole itself.
Yeah.
And so with Aimpoint, and this is a green reading aspect, we would focus on what's happening between the golf ball and the hole. We would execute a read using our feet rather than our visual system. We would put a value on the amount of tilt or slope that we experience with our feet. And then we create a read based off using our fingers back of the golf ball, which creates an angle, which incredibly, Karl, this is mind blowing. It matches the numbers from 120,000 lines of software that were used on the TV for 5 years. The actual finger read, or the express read as it's called, and our original read match beautifully. It's incredible to see it in the background. What we know technically and what we see with the execution is really funky.
So the actual process based on the actual data on the greens is unerringly accurate if it's used correctly.
You've just said something really important, and I have a little list of questions I have here for Karl Morris, right? And you said something really important, which was if it's used correctly. And if you don't mind, one of the questions I had for you was, we'll often be sitting watching a tournament together, Mark and Jamie and I, and we will see a player on either LPGA or PGA Tour execute a read, and it's not Aimpoint. We don't know what it is, but it looks like Aimpoint. And my question is, when you're playing for that amount of money or to try and win these golf tournaments, why do these players not go and seek out the best and learn it correctly? I find that fascinating.
Mm. Yeah, because you're dealing with ultimately a multi-million pound, potentially a multi-million pound business, aren't you? And you hopefully in other areas of business, you wouldn't just make guesses about what you should buy in terms of products or projections or anything like that. You'd want to deal with some hard data.
Yeah.
That aside, Gareth, from I know how much you've studied the mind. Once you've then assessed what's in front of you on the greens, you've worked that out to a degree, or not worked it out to a degree, you've worked it out using Aimpoint. Talk me through then how that potentially helps the visuals of the putt and what you would pay attention to after that to get the job done.
Okay. We're very much as instructors, we don't tell people what to do in terms of what they should see. So, for example, people will talk to us about, oh, should I see an apex read after doing this? Do I just see an aim point itself? Am I looking for an entry angle? Am I looking for a launch direction? These are all the kind of questions we get asked. And the answer, if we're honest about it, is I don't know, but we have to figure out what works for you. Okay. Right. What I would say, Karl, is very interestingly, when you see people's reads being correctly adjusted, you see their strokes changing as well. Because what you witness is the brain and nervous system going, we're okay here, we're aiming in the right spot, and therefore I don't need to apply manipulation to try and make this work.
So that's such a crucial point, that is, and you must see it on a daily basis with this. Isn't it amazing how you see the subconscious, for want of a better description, trying to make up, doing its best to make up for really poor reads? It's phenomenal to watch the body in action doing its very best to make up for the misapplication of reading the greens.
Totally. And that's a player who'll oftentimes turn around to me and go, look, I've just pulled that like crazy. My stroke is terrible. And I'm going, if you didn't pull that like crazy, you were missing that 7 feet low. Like you've just done yourself a favor pulling that like crazy. It's really gratifying to see the golfer settle into it. Their stroke begins to settle down. The patterns that they often cite to us, I always push, I always pull, things like that. We can have great conversations around the outcome is a push or a pull, but we have to stop dealing with symptoms and find the source. So as a coach, if you and I can eradicate a source, we've really helped the golfer correctly. If we continually treat symptoms and look at face angles on certain technology, but don't recognize that player is aiming at the wrong spot, we're ultimately not really helping them.
So on that point, Gareth, and I think again it's hugely important. Would you say an awful lot of the sort of places that strokes are tested? I'm thinking of indoor studios and things like that. Is there perhaps a fundamental flaw in the place that we test strokes of their efficacy based on what you've just said?
100%. We see
I knew
most
the
stroke
answer to that, by the way, but I just had to
I
ask
know
the
you
question.
did. We both knew the answer to that. We see the majority of stroke testing taking place in what I would describe as sterile environments.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what creates break, that's going to be the amount of slope. What would increase or decrease it will be other aspects outdoors. So friction level or stimp of green. Has moisture increased or decreased? Is there wind involved? Length of putt. If you give me a normal golfer, I don't know, let's say an 18 handicap on a 10-foot indoor putt, within 10 minutes, they should look like a genius.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's not what the game of golf looks like.
Because getting somebody to roll a ball end over end indoors, it's not that challenging, really, is it, as you say?
It's not that challenging, and it's very far removed from standing over a 10-footer in the first hole that you need to hold to get your round going versus it doesn't matter. I can rake another ball in and just hit it and keep going until I feel like I can just loop through the same stroke over and over again. But that's not what the game of golf looks like at all, as we both know.
Yeah. Yeah. So for people who maybe haven't looked at aim point before, what would be some of the starting points of entry? Obviously, it's ultimately to come and see you or Mark or Jamie and get involved.
Yeah.
But are there some entry points that they can begin to explore this sort of fascinating area?
Let me start with the number one area of trepidation that is cited to me, and this is from the players trying to break 100 right up to the highest tour levels in the world and the caddies who are operating on those tours, and they all have trepidation around, will I be able to correctly feel the slope numbers? That's a piece that I've never used my feet reading greens before. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this. And what I say back there, Carl, is you've got to remember that all the time your brain is receiving afferent signals via your body about what's going on, right? And so we're not creating something new, we're bringing it into your awareness, which is a very different thing. This is something that's happening in the background anyway. And so if there's a player out there going, what are these guys talking about? Just when you're standing on the putting green, you don't have to read a putt doing this yet, but you should see a certified instructor to go about it correctly. But in the meantime, if you're standing there and you just face the hole and go, is 1 foot higher than the other? Is there a sense of pressure going in a certain direction I hadn't been aware of before? Mark has had double amputees, war veterans, learn aim point, and they were able to talk about what they were feeling in their pelvis.
Really?
Like incredible stuff. Honestly, I had a lady come to me and she was very tragically simultaneously losing her eyesight and her hearing. And she plays in golf and loves golf. And she came to me and she's just, this is so easy because her sense of awareness would have been already heightened due to her particular circumstances. So certainly when people are on the green, just to have a walk around and say, if I turn and face the hole, what am I feeling here? And if I went somewhere different, does that change? Which it inevitably will as the slopes will change.
What I love about this, though, is that you just touched on something there about it's heightening your awareness on this. But also, by definition, if you're on the green and you're really tuning into your senses, you're tuning into the feeling of your feet, again, by definition, you can't be anywhere other than right here and now present to your experience, can you? So actually, I've never even thought about it like this, but aim point is a great way of grounding yourself in that hallowed present, isn't it? Where you need to be attending to the task, not the meaning of the task.
Yes, you are in that moment. You are in the moment because you have to be, because you're receiving important information back through your body that is helping you make a very quick, very accurate decision on what you need to do in terms of aiming that putt. Yeah.
And then once you've gained that information, and as you said, that the potential options could be the start line, it could be the apex, it could be the entry point. What's your experience in terms of once people have made that decision, and let's say it's starting to be made on better information through aim point, what mistakes do you see or you hear people make in terms of where their attention then goes back to that's not really productive for them to hold the putt?
So the piece that I'm always having conversations with players around is my objective as a coach is that my players have clarity before execution. And what happens at times is they'll execute an aim-point read, then they'll go back behind the ball. Then the next thing I'll see them going for the far side of the hole. And I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. You have all the information you needed the minute you executed the aim-point read. Now, if you want to crouch down and have a little look-see and in your mind create that curve or whatever it is, by all means do. But we don't want as coaches to keep adding layers of complexity because now we're adding layers of potential breakdown ultimately. So it's to keep the read as clean as possible, which allows their attention. And if you're dealing with high skilled players, like we teach a huge amount of tour players, start line doesn't tend to be that poor, right? These are very good golfers. So now we're looking at start line is pretty dialed in. The read is dialed in. We've given them the freedom to focus on what is a huge separator at elite level golf, which is the speed of the putt. And that freedom is going back then, Karl, to what I was saying about strokes get much smoother. There's less manipulation. They're not trying to make something happen. If I just set it off at that point, it's got a chance of going in.
So it's actually giving them the freedom then to focus on. Gary Nicola and myself wrote a book about lost art of putting, and we firmly believe that if people focused a little bit more on pace, as a broad generalization, for an awful lot of people, if they improve the pace just a little bit, it would transform the putting statistics. But if you have the correct read, from what you're explaining, it's freeing you up to do that.
Yeah, the sequence that we've seen through extensive testing is the read is king, because otherwise the stroke manipulation will continue to operate in the background. Yeah. And with stroke manipulation, we're more likely to have off-center strikes off the putter face, and therefore our speed control could be dubious. But the minute we get people through the read process, we really want to push them towards speed at that point in time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think there's huge gains to be made there for as well, by the way. I think speed is a really, the potential for speed for players across the spectrum is extremely high. Potential gains.
Yeah, and it's amazing how the hole can start to capture the ball a bit more often when you get the speed right, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. You can. Yeah. Things start going your way.
Yeah. So what would be some, again, developing this, Gareth, what have you found have been some really useful protocols in terms of practicing putting or training for putting? Because my experience is that I see an awful lot of people on putting greens, or I used to do when I was on tour a lot, grinding away doing certain things, and at best I think it's boring, but for a lot of people I think it's actually quite destructive, really, or it can be quite destructive in terms of how they practice. What would be some suggestions that you would give players to explore in terms of how they train for putting?
If you don't mind, Karl, I'm going to back my way into that one, because the first thing I believe as a coach is that players who bring us data are giving us a much greater chance of assisting them on their journey. Because we can very quickly see the areas that need to be addressed and where they need help most. And the reason I say that to you is most of the time I look at people on a putting green, they're on a putting green, but they're not training to become a better putter.
Right.
And they're two very different things. So when we talk in terms of training, I think the number one mistake that's made, and again, this is across all spectrum of players, is training isn't about improving in the moment. Training is about potentially better future performances. And so in the moment, therefore, we're probably going to have to anticipate some frustration, a lot of mistakes. And I think, again, when we watch people train, they tend to do something they're good at already and keep doing it and look like a legend for the next 30 minutes. But as you and I both know, we need to generate prediction errors to become better at something. We need a moment where we hit a putt and go, that should be good, and look up and go, whoa, what just happened? Because whatever way our brain was processing that putt pre-execution, it's just received an upgrade now because of that prediction error. So our training should be at times based around pushing yourselves to make some mistakes and try and figure out the puzzles. And that then, to your point, I don't want to see somebody doing the same putt 60 times their own a putting green. That is mind-numbingly boring. And as the brain is switched off after the first 5 or 6 putts.
Yeah,
right? It's figured out that one.
It stops solving the problem, hasn't it?
Yeah, because the problem no longer exists.
Yeah.
So I think I'd love to see, and then in terms of planning training, what am I training? Why am I training it? And that's important from a motivational perspective, because that question of what if I learn to get this ball closer to the hole from 40 feet, that's going to reduce my score on average by X amount of shots. Now we're starting to activate some dopamine in the system. We're getting motivated. We're almost excited walking onto the putting green. So we've got, why am I doing it? And then how am I doing it?
Mm.
What does my training need to look like that would, in the long term, lead to a notable increase in skill ability? And I think it's a really hard conversation, Carl. Like I've stood with players who are competing, as I say, for a lot of money. I'm like, you can already do this.
Mm.
This is not of benefit to you. This is skill maintenance at the very best. And I accept that some players have what I would call pet drills, right? Or the comfort blanket drill that
Yeah.
they have to do every time they go on the putting green. But you want to get that out of the way early and then get yourself into learning mode and challenge yourself and do some different things. To your point, speed control, nobody's ever going to be too good at speed.
No.
Like speed is such and it's such an easy area to develop with a little bit of creativity.
Mm. So my next question would be, what would be some good speed drills that people could explore?
I'll give you a concept that people could explore that we don't largely see out there, which is um, when we talk to people about speed, right? And let's just take a very simple uphill and downhill putts. So we talk to them about speed, and they'll go, the uphill putt is slow and the downhill putt is fast. I go, okay. I'll go, uphill, are we hitting the ball harder or softer? Well, harder. So I say, is the ball moving faster or slower? Oh, it's faster. Okay. Now let's reverse that. Let's go up above the cup and hit it down to the hole. What do we need to do? We need to hit it softer, and therefore the ball is moving slower, which takes people a little minute or two to get because it's going against what they normally think. But now we introduce something that everybody understands, which is a concept of time. And so we'll say, let's hit a 20-foot uphill putt, and I want you to count how long it takes to reach the hole. And so I hit it, and maybe it takes 5 seconds to reach the hole because the ball is moving quickly. It's getting there quickly. If we go above the cup and hit a 20-footer downhill, I'll now challenge them to make that ball take 10 seconds to reach the hole.
Right.
Okay. And I'll say, just make a stroke that you feel will deliver a ball moving at a certain speed that will take 10 seconds to reach the hole. I don't tell them how long the stroke is. I don't tell them anything like that. Just make a stroke that you feel will deliver the appropriate speed. And you can see this moment where they go, oh, I've never thought about
Never
speed
thought about
like
it
this
that way.
before.
Mm.
Yeah. And it's really empowering because we're tapping into something, time, that we all understand at a very good level, right? Because our lives are ruled by clocks and alarms
Mm.
and schedules. So when you talk to people in a slightly different way, you can get great results because they just respond to it differently as well.
But that singular perception that it's going to take less time to get there uphill and more time downhill, that by definition, that perception is then going to influence the mechanics, isn't it? Clearly.
If I ask you to make a putt take longer to reach somewhere, I don't think you're going to box that putt down the hill.
No.
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 And you can play around with it further in that if the first putt did still travel too far, which you can on occasion, let's just make it take more time and more time. What's the most time you can make it take to reach the hole?
Right. Right.
Right. So and there's an element of game within that then. It's not, I'm not telling them how to do it.
Mm.
I'm just throwing out a little challenge and saying, what would it be?
But that's where you're then tapping into a great learning mechanism. And the brain is brilliant at solving problems. If you give it clarity of what the problem is, it's amazing how efficient we are at that. And then all of a sudden, practice training sessions on the green can be full of curiosity and engagement, as opposed to this idea that if I stand in this place long enough and repeat this movement enough times, surely this will come with me on the golf course, which it just to this day, it drives me mad how many people seem to still be under that illusion.
I think, Carl, I think the industry, what has happened if we look at the progression, which has been, as I've cited earlier on, we had Faldo and Ledbetter, and this idea that you could create this perfect swing that would never break down under pressure. And then we've had this advent of technology, right? Certain parts of this, I look at it and I always say technology was invented first, the necessity was invented thereafter. And now it's like every player feels like they should have 75 different numbers every time they walk onto a putting green or a driving range. And if they don't have that, then there's something wrong. And it's literally the opposite of how the brain wants to execute movement. So the complexity again has been added in, more and more layers of technology are being added in. And yet you think about what I just described in terms of that little speed game that we can play, that's true learning. If you are utilizing an implement which is guiding you, the example I gave is let's put the kid on the bike with the stabilizers.
Yeah.
The kid looks like the kid can cycle the bike.
Mm.
Okay, what happens when we take the stabilizers off? The kid is now in the hedge.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's called learning because they don't know what balance feels like. And here's the key statement until they don't know what balance doesn't feel like.
Mm.
So you have to know what it isn't to know what it is. So if I don't know where the left edge of the cup is, And the right edge of the cup is, I also don't know where the middle of the cup is. So oftentimes when I'm working with kids, we'll just put a T peg on the left edge, T peg on the right edge. We'll put them at 2 or 3 feet, so it's not overly complex. And I'll challenge them to hit the left tee, hit the right tee. Now show me where the center is. They then own the delivery of the club face, and I've never spoken to them about how to deliver the club face.
Mm. Mm. And that's fundamentally, it's music to my ears, Gareth. That's fundamental how we learn so many things, isn't it? Too hot, too cold, just right. Fall to the left, fall to the right, find balance. And yet, I think people's relationship to perceived failure is so poor that it's been drilled into us, this idea of going to get something right as opposed to exploring either side of what's right. If I can swing it too slow, I can swing it too fast, I can find my tempo. And you're only limited by your imagination with this then, aren't you?
Completely. And I think the technology has just made it's made the game so much about perfection. And we look online and we're seeing data from top players, and people need to remember these are largely Olympians playing golf, right? They're not, inverted commas, normal people in terms of how they can move and execute a golf swing or hit putts. So their data is just not relevant to the marketplace. And yet, we see players being compared to, you'll see maybe online a swing analysis and Rory's above, and I'm like, oh my God, that person does not have Rory's physique, doesn't have his flexibility, doesn't have the thousands of repetitions, hundreds of thousands of repetitions. And the other part, Karl, that I find fascinating is people forget. A lot of people come to me, right, in Ireland, and they'll say, I was really good at hurling. If you haven't seen hurling, folks, it's a wonderful national sport here in Ireland with a stick and a thing called a slitter. And I've heard it eloquently described as murder crossed with lacrosse. But
Immensely skillful game.
It's an incredible game to watch live. It really is. But guys who've played that game to a very high level, they'll come to me and go, why am I so bad at golf? And what I'll say is, you forget the hundreds of hours you spent banging a ball against the wall. I said, you didn't think you were training then, but I said, you were in a very deep learning process doing all that. And a lot of people discount that, no matter what the sport was, soccer in the UK or basketball in the United States. People forget about all the training they did because it wasn't training, it was play, it was fun. And then they come to golf and it's, why can't I be good immediately? Okay, I can't. I know what I'll do. I'll go and get as much technological guidance as I can get. And now what was a word I used to earlier on? And I know a word I've heard you talk a lot about. Commitment will only happen in the absence of discord. And if I've got a player standing with 42 swing thoughts, not sure what the read is it uphill or downhill? I can promise you they've missed the putt, or they've hit a really bad putt that somehow went in. So we want to train towards clarity. We want to train in a way that gives us confidence, and we want belief in our processes that we can utilize in the golf course when we're under pressure.
Yeah. So taking some of these thoughts into the long game, because I know you don't just teach putting, what have been some of your key insights over the years in terms of and I know we've probably already touched on a lot of things, developing skills, but then being able to then access those skills out on the golf course?
Yeah, so the piece, and I think I know one of your recent guests spoke about this, about the concept of having a scale of 0 to 10 for argument's sake. And so the player comes to me with a slice, and oftentimes, and this freaks them out, I'll say, hit me a bigger slice, please. And they go, what? And I go, your slice was a 7, give me a 10.
Yeah.
And they'll look at you and go, how would I do that? And I'm going, I don't know. You just give it a go. Amazingly there. If you say that to a kid, they'll just say no problem. If you say that to an adult, they don't know, how do I do that? But it's to give them a little bit more ownership of what they're doing, to bring that more into their awareness and go, oh my God, I'm really coming across the goal, whatever the case is. And I'll go, if that was a 10, show me 8, show me 6, show me 4, and you'll start to see straighter shots. On the course, then I would say to them, what number are you hitting right now? Okay, not what swing thought, not what number. Oh, I'm going to give you a 3. Great, give me a 3. The thing is, if it's a 2 or a 4, even if it's a 5 or a 6, ball's going to be okay. It's going to be in play for most golfers. And so I work a lot like that to try and bring more into their awareness what they're currently doing, which gives them the option of doing something different. The secondary piece, which I think is key, Karl, is people's movement patterns will be based on the concepts, the theories, the ideas that they've been exposed to as they're beginning their journey in golf. And it's so important as coaches that we enter their world and ask questions that they peel back the layers and you go, oh, you think you've got to do this during the golf swing. Yeah, like a classic one this morning. I was coaching the guy, and he hit this beautiful chip shot, and he'd been really struggling. I've got on his tight line, and nips this thing. I'm going, that is gorgeous. He goes, I didn't accelerate properly through it. And in that moment, he opened up a window that I really needed to know about, because he was going to go off and take what I gave him, but continue to apply the concept of mass acceleration through the golf ball, which would completely sabotage everything else. So if we can get people to reveal through discussions, and something I'll do a lot is take the golf club off and go, hey, I'm your friend. I've never played golf before. I've never hit a putt in my life. Do me a favor. Just give me a lesson here, will you?
Yeah. Teach me how to play
Yeah.
golf.
Yeah, just show me tell me about this putting thing. What do I need to do, or what should it look like? And they'll reveal some stuff. And you go, okay, now I know how I can help you.
Mm, mm. Yeah, it's the wonderful thing, that, isn't it? Mike Hebron, 20 odd years ago, in discussions with him about this, about the whole idea that really a job as a coach isn't to change swings, it's to change concepts, because what in front of you is just purely a result of the concept that a person has. And why wouldn't you think you need to get the club underneath the ball to lift it up? That's what I did at tennis, and that's what I would do at ping pong, or whatever.
That's right.
As you say, you can only make progress when you actually enter the students' world, rather than imposing your world on them, and leaving them with what they currently have.
Yeah, and very much so in your own work. Like, I'm sure you're not injecting your thoughts into people's heads. You're working with how they're thinking, and maybe asking them the reasons for their thinking, and can they expand upon it and all that, and give you access to some of the concepts that they're using that you can help them with as well.
Yeah. Yeah, you can switch it over into the mental game. Richard Bandley years ago would say, tell me how you do nervousness, teach me how to be nervous, kind of thing. And then you get a sense of what's going on in somebody's head about how they go about producing that. So looking forward, what are your sort of guidance? You mentioned technology there. What would be some suggestions for people who do have TrackMan available to them, or FlightScope, or whatever it is? How could technology be used better? Because it's not going to go away. We both, I think, agree it's misused badly a lot of the time. But what are ways that it can be really beneficial if you've got those facilities?
I would say as well, I think we're both in the same hymn sheet, in that I'm not against technology.
No.
I'm against technology hurting players or them becoming over reliant upon it. But I do recognize its place, and I think it's got a great place to help certain people. Let's use aim point as an example here, because when we set up our discs, we use a digital level on the green, which gives us the reading of the slope. And when people come to me, they're like, oh my God, I need one of those, I need one of those. I'll go, okay, but let me train you how to train with it. And I'll pop a ball down at 10 feet, and I'll go read the putt. They go, okay, give me the level. I'm going, no, go read the putt, please. And so they'll stand and go, now tell me the number. And it's not like school stuff. It's just, go on, have a guess, whatever you think. They go, I think it's a 3. Now I'll put the level down, and they look down and go, oh, that's a 2. And I went, you just learned something. So the technology's affirming, but what I don't do is put the level on the green and say, walk in there and feel a 2. I want them, first of all, to be aware of sensation wherever they're feeling it in their body. And then we can upgrade the system and go, you thought that was a 3. It's actually a 2. And we would do that for 10 or 15 minutes. It is remarkable how quickly people go, you know what, Gareth, that's about a 2.5. And it could be a 2.2, could be a 3, right? But the key to me there is they're getting more confident, and they're saying the number a little bit quicker, and they're making the call. And I think that type of thing is great. Oftentimes, if I'm using TrackMan, I actually stand in front of the screen so the players can't see the data.
Yeah.
And they'll hit the shot, and I go, tell me what it did.
Yes. Yeah.
And I go, oh, just tell me, have a guess. And then also, I want you to tell me how far it went. For the elite player, they're hitting wedges. I want you to tell me how far the wedge went.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when you do that, they get into it more. And again, Karl, it's that idea of, it's not monotonous training 100-yard wedge shots for 45 minutes. Is a little bit different. We're making the brain work a bit harder. The player's more engaged. So they're more likely to switch on and take some of that learning home with them, which can then be consolidated when they're sleeping that night.
Yeah. Yeah. Gareth, I knew it was going to be an interesting conversation. I would say it's fascinating. Some brilliant insights there. I think the concept of the speed of the time a putt takes, I think for anybody listening to that, if there's a light bulb not gone off in your head at that point, something's not quite right. Fantastic to catch up after all this time. Where can people find out about you and coming seeing you over in Ireland, or getting involved with Aimpoint? What's the sort of best places to look for you and get on board?
So to find me, it's currently under construction. There's a basic website up there at the moment. It's garethmcshay.com. Thereafter, Karl, we would say for people, and I mentioned this to you earlier on about the best players in the world at times not seeking out certified instructors. Aimpoint is a system. If you learn it correctly, it's beautifully simple and incredibly accurate. So seek out a certified instructor on aimpointgolf.com. If you haven't access to a certified instructor, we recently released a suite of videos, Mark and Jamie and I, and it's makeeverything.aimpointgolf.com.
Right, right. And to final thing, ask a lot of guests. If there was three things that you'd not quite written on your headstone, because that's a bit macabre, really. But if there was three things that you'd want people to remember from this conversation that would be really important for the rest of their golfing experience, what would they be from all your sort of experiences in golf?
So make mistakes in training, but make mistakes that you're consciously executing. So push the putt on purpose, pull the putt on purpose, and then start to reduce the amount of push or pull, so you start to gain ownership over the stroke itself. That idea of playing around with time, Karl, is I've seen so many players just go, wow, this has changed my putting. Because the example I give you is we have a really quick putt in the back edge of 17 at Edmonstown. If you hit that with any force, you cannot stop the ball on the green. Not just close to the hole, you can't stop on the green, okay? And they'll come to me and they'll say, this is impossible. And I'll go, just make it take 20 seconds.
Right.
I'm like,
Right.
what? And I go, just try. Let's see. So that one's extremely helpful. And then technology has its place, but it's not to be relied upon. So you use it sparingly and make sure if somebody's using it with you, that it's minimal exposure to technology and more about you and your game, the concepts and the theories and the ideas that you're currently utilizing.
Yeah, right. Gareth, thanks ever so much. That's been a great conversation.
Pleasure as always, Karl. Great to see you.